All right, we had a story we wanted to take a closer look at because, let's be fair, it's the holiday season, and I think this one's going to be the gift that keeps on giving. The big story this week was the continued fallout from our friends at Salt Typhoon. You may recall that we covered this 2 months ago on the rundown. Well, now the US government is really starting to feel the heat from the exposure of so many telecom companies, and they're wanting some answers. We're going to start off with our friend, FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel, because she's announced a proposed set of rules that would require companies that participate in the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, also known as CALEA, they would have to have a yearly requirement to certify their cybersecurity risk management plans in order to prevent hackers. But that's not good enough for Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon because he has proposed a bill that would require telecom networks to be secured, with the FCC going further and implementing specific requirements instead of just saying that they need to certify their own plans. I know that this has been a big story in the news for the last 2 months, and there's been some shocking things that have been said by the US federal government that go against the grain of everything they've been trying to tell us for years. But Stephen, I want to jump in here. Why is the US federal government suddenly reversing course and saying we've got to get this thing under control?
Well, because they've got to get this thing under control. I was actually having a conversation this week with a non-technical person, and the conversation came around to basically foreign governments hacking and law enforcement and things like that. But it was with a non-technical person, and I was so proud as a dedicated nerd and reporter for the Gestalt IT rundown when this person pointed out to me that, it sounds like a good idea to have law enforcement have access to systems, but as soon as you do that, it just opens it up for the bad guys to exploit those backdoors themselves and get into those systems. And I was just like, yes, thank you. Why can't the entire government understand what you're saying? It's true. Anytime you have a backdoor into a system, it's going to be exploited by the bad guys. This has happened literally every backdoor since the beginning of computing. And it's been warned about literally since I was in college. I remember reading about this, on the well and in, publications at the time saying, no, we cannot have exploitable backdoors. It sounds like a good idea to let law enforcement snoop on telecoms channels. It sounds like it would be secure if we built a system where they would have to apply and show a warrant and then open up the back doors. What's going to happen? Inevitably, the bad guys are going to use that same system to get in because it's just a honeypot. It's like, it would sound like a good idea if you required everyone to keep all of their cash money in a big pile at City Hall so that the police could protect it. Well, yeah, except then you've created the biggest, baddest honeypot anywhere, and so everyone's going to attack that, and they're going to find ways to exploit it. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. We saw CALEA, which, again, it sounded like a bad idea when it was originally proposed under the Clinton administration, which I remember because I was in tech at that time too. And yes, surprise, surprise, it is a bad idea. And now what we're trying to do is we've got proposals to fix the barn door now that the horses have already escaped. We need to shut this stuff down, and we need to stop proposing backdoors for the good guys.
I'm going to butcher a quote from Fight Club that's absolutely appropriate here. On a long enough timeline, the likelihood that you're going to get hacked is 100%. And CALEA has been around, like you said, since the Clinton administration. So this is 20 years old at this point. And we knew that something was going to happen. What we hoped was that, ultimately the bad guys aren't going to have enough resources to be able to get into some of these areas, and we're going to keep them air gapped and secured. And no, I was kidding. You've seen the security in an average telecom. We're lucky the thing didn't catch on fire 10 years ago. And for the federal government agencies like the FBI to make a statement last week saying, you guys should really be using iMessage and Signal because they're secure and nobody can eavesdrop on them. My jaw literally hit the table because this is the same organization, as Stephen pointed out, for years that has been saying, well, we need backdoor access into iMessage because we can't do our jobs. do you see now why we told you that this is a bad idea? Because any backdoor that exists is by its very nature exploitable. Ask anyone who saw all of those hacking tools get dumped onto the internet 10 years ago when the CIA got breached, and how many hack platforms, how many malware delivery devices have been built on top of the stuff that we've been doing. Like, if it exists, it will be leaked. If it gets leaked, it will be used. And I think, well, first of all, I can never say this enough, but props to Ron Wyden for holding people's feet to the fire and saying outright, you have to do better. You have to be better than this. If I could have a Senate full of Ron Wydens who understands technology as well as he does, our technology landscape would be a much better place. And I know that there's some shifts that are about to happen in the US federal government, especially on the FCC. And having had Jessica Rosenworcel kind of leading the charge on these people for the last couple of years has been kind of nice, because she's saying similar things to what we believe in the tech industry. There needs to be better oversight. There needs to be certification. You can't just plug everything into a dark room with a keep out sign on the door and hope that everything is going to work out for the best. Because even during things like the Arab Spring revolts of years ago, we saw massive internet taps being installed in data centers that were just, brushed by on the news. And we're like, wait a minute, I recognize that device. I know what they've been doing with the internet traffic. That's something that the US government has wanted for years. They've wanted to be able to funnel all that traffic through a place where they can monitor it and keep an eye out for ne'er-do-wells. And now look where it's got you. The ne'er-do-wells actually turned out to be other governments who love the fact that you've centralized everything, and it's a one-stop shop to be able to get in there. And this is the other thing that people need to understand when they read this story. This is not, oopsie daisy, we got hacked, we need to change some passwords and everything will be fine. They are literally discussing whether or not they need to send funding to AT&T and Verizon to rip out all of the gear that's already in their networks, because there's a very good possibility they're never going to be able to eject Salt Typhoon at all. They are that embedded in there. So I feel like Jessica Rosenworcel's not going far enough, but she's also kind of hamstrung because of some of the rules that the Supreme Court has laid down about whether or not the FCC has enforcement powers. I think Ron Wyden's on the right track, but the question is he going to be able to get the bill passed in time to be able to get them the resources that they need, or at least the requirements that they have to fix this before Salt Typhoon eavesdrops on anything else? I mean, I'm not worried because I use iMessage to text all of my friends anyway, but I'm worried about my grandma.
And on that note, too, let me get back to the whole iMessage encryption thing. Yeah, it was really jaw-dropping to have the FBI recommending that people use encrypted communication channels and Signal and so on, because this is what we nerds have been saying for a long, long time. It is a good idea. However, of course, we know that there are some nuances there. Apple has been doing a very good job at doing end-to-end encryption on iMessage. Google's end-to-end encryption, one of the bloggers in the Apple community gleefully pointed out that Google's description of their own encryption is incomplete at best and misleading at worst, because not all of the Google stuff is end-to-end encrypted unless everybody's running the latest versions. But that being said, RCS is now being deployed across iPhones and Google Android phones, and that can be encrypted. We heard about Signal, of course. I like the fact that these problems are causing normal people to finally wake up and realize what's going on. Another story that we had recently that kind of is relevant here, Apple implemented a new feature that reboots an iPhone if it hasn't been used in 72 hours. That was something that law enforcement was crying quite a lot about, because they would have these iPhones in lockup. In many cases, they would actually have them be unlocked by the suspect, and then they would plug them in and they would keep them in a special situation, disconnected, so that they could access that data later. I understand why law enforcement wants that, and in fact, I can understand why that would be beneficial to them in some cases. The problem is that if you allow that, if you allow a lower level of protection after first unlock, AFU as Apple calls it, then you're also theoretically opening the door to people exploiting that on stolen phones to criminals using it to exploit people's vulnerability, to break into people's identity theft, sharing photos, all sorts of things that you can do if you grab somebody's phone. One of the things that struck me in New York City this weekend was how many people walk around on the streets with a $1,000 device out and in their hands and pay no attention, pay no mind to anyone. And again, non-technical person said, well, of course, that thing's not useful if somebody steals it because it's going to be locked and it's going to be encrypted and they won't be able to register it and all that. And I wanted to actually them, but again, I wanted to also give them a pat on the back and a hug because they're seeing the value of encryption right there. A normal, ordinary, non-technical person is seeing that having these devices be locked down, having them be encrypted, having them reboot into BFU mode after 72 hours, all of these things protects all of us in a way that allowing law enforcement to snoop on phones might not protect all of us. So again, all of this comes down to the fact that you're protected more by widespread deployment of security technologies than you are by allowing the police to break into security technologies.